The European Union today allows for the free movement of people between EU states, making the crossing of borders even easier than in the past. Moving people also means moving goods and ideas. But what does this freedom mean for the cultural retention of the states involved? As ideas and peoples continue to intermingle, the once clearly determined political borders tend to become a little fuzzy. With increased free movement of people comes a disintegration of cultures confined to a specific city, slowly creating a world with clearer connections and links between people. Take for instance the pinnacle French city, Paris.
On me dit que nos vies ne valent pas grand-chose, elles passent en un instant comme fanent les roses. On me dit que le temps qui glisse est un salaud, que de nos chagrins il s'en fait des manteaux. Pourtant quelqu'un m'a dit que tu m'aimais encore. C'est quelqu'un qui m'a dit que tu m'aimais encore. Serait-ce possible alors?
Most people's concept of Paris is a very high-class and elegant society. But in reality, the place is much more diverse. No longer is Paris a city with a singular culture confined to it. Instead, there exists a great mix of influences inside the city, from across Europe, but also from across the world. Despite this increasing uniformity, Parisian peoples pride in what they like to consider their culture, and are trying to impose restrictions on the amount of non-French law to be spoken. The city in general seems to be fighting against the changes occurring in its very center. The once prominent and Paris-specific culture does not exist in the same fashion as in the past. They claim language is a part of their culture, and they are just trying to preserve it. But can that really be the case? Is language the epitome of what makes a culture a culture? If that's to be the case, then how do cities without one official language fit into the mix? For these cities, do increased border crossings not matter as much, simply because they never had a centralized culture to begin with? Perhaps because Paris, which has for many years possessed a distinct identity, has a reason for being so insistent on maintaining this idea of this city-confined culture. Brussels, on the other hand, has a much more open approach to its changing city culture. Brussels has a long and historic past filled with several different occupiers and influences. Could this be why today the city seems so willing to accept the changing nature of its own culture? Unlike Paris, this city does not seem worried about the effects of having many people from around the world in Europe living there.
Today the second most common language in Brussels is English. The people are speaking a lot of different languages. The only one they speak in common is English. For instance, my neighbors are from Estonia. I do not speak Estonian. They don't speak French. We speak English. And so Brussels is changing still. I mean, if you come back in Brussels about 15, 20 years from now, the first language in Brussels will be Southern English. Today, French remains the first one.
So despite the traditional Brussels image of chocolate, beer, and waffles, the city is growing to encompass a much greater field. Could its openness to languages be part of the reason for its lack of a resistance to a decentralization of its culture? Or is there something else at work here? Other cities like Geneva and Strasbourg have also had conflicting cultural histories. They too don't seem concerned with the disappearance of their city-confined cultures. Instead, these cities, like Brussels, have figured out a way to peacefully morph the incoming influences and embrace the wider cultural identity created. In fact, something that Geneva is today known for began as a result of incoming people.
Watches, for example, ladies couldn't wear many jewels. It was controlled, and that's why these French refugees carried the watchmaking here, industry here, and other industries, of course. And as jewelers didn't really have a lot of work because it was to wear jewels, it was really strict. So jewelers started to make watches. And that's the two moments. These refugees carry the industry, and our jewelers, they don't really have a lot of work, so they started to make watches.
The strength of a city's identified culture impacts that city's openness to change as borders become easier to cross and new people become residents. Today, as cities continue to borrow ideas from one another and the migration of people from state to state persists, the city-defined cultures of the past are truly disappearing. While at first this disappearance may seem sad for cultural integrity, it actually shows how this concept of confined culture is non-existent. Like people traveling through the EU, culture is fluid and mobile. With the recent increase in the flow of people, inevitably more mixing of cultures has occurred, resulting in less location-based cultures. By accepting this flexibility, a greater understanding of other people across political borders can be achieved. After all, why do we as humans try to define specific cultural tendencies, if not to understand the other in the first place?